Professor Samuel Scolnicov from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, who kindly was willing to give us the lecture on Euthydemus in this summertime, and it's unfortunately the time when nobody is in Prague, so he has sorry to bring only such a small audience. Oh, but still, we record your speech on camera, and perhaps we can a little bit later. And I must say that Professor Scolnicov perhaps has already just published the book on Euthydemus.
No, the book on Euthydemus is being published. I mean, it's on the queue for publishing in academia for that, but well, they must be starting on it now. It's finished. Well, thank you very much to Professor Plato for inviting me. As I was passing through Prague, I thought it would be a good idea, even in the summer. I'm sorry, but the summer is the academic traveling season, and I'm sorry I can't speak Czech. I could do it in a few other languages, but Czech. I could. So the Euthydemus, I'm going to. Well, let's do this. I understand we have about 2 hours, which is it's a good chunk of time. I prefer not to have a question period because when I have a question period, then the first question shows that I've been completely out of track and nobody understood me, and I said the opposite of what I wanted to say. So please stop me at any moment in the middle of a phrase. I don't mind.
That's exactly the habit we are.
Very good. One of my great teachers in Jerusalem, he used to say that a lecture must be like a cat. However we throw it, it will fall on its feet. So I'm not a cat, but I try. Okay, so the Euthydemus. Euthydemus is not much read. When it's read, it's sort of passed by very, very rapidly as being a collection of jokes, if you want. Aristotle went through the Euthydemus, and that's his sophisticated entity, and I'm going to say a word about that, what he did with the Euthydemus. But I became more and more convinced in the last years that the Euthydemus is the second most important Platonic dialogue. The first one you choose. We publish it on any reason, or whatever you want. But the Euthydemus is the second most important. Well, it's a little bit but not much. What I want to do, I want to stress 2 or 3 points of the Euthydemus. And leave aside many things that if you want it, if you ask me, and if I'm capable of answering, I talk about that too. The first thing I want to show that Euthydemus and the two clowns, they're very much like Humpty Dumpty or like Obczynski and Obczynski. Sort of, we have those pairs everywhere. They are much more serious than we normally take them. They are a serious threat to Socrates and Plato. And someone, was it Hoffman or somebody else, says that when Plato is joking, that's where he is most serious. And here he is joking and he is very, very serious. The second thing I want to stress is Plato's conception of language. And he has I would say an anti-Aristotelian conception of language and anti-modern conception of language. And the third thing is quite obvious, is the difference Plato wants to stress, the very difficult difference between philosophy and Socrates. The sophists are so close to Socrates that even Crito, I pronounce the names in the usual manner, not in English. That Crito, even he can't tell the difference. But if you are attentive to what Plato is writing, I think the difference can be seen. So, first of all, a few formal things. Because in Plato, I would like to stress, there is no separation between literature and philosophy. It's not that he writes philosophy and then he puts it in a nice literary form. I mean, it's not Berkeley, it's not Hume, it's not Galileo. The dialogue is something essential to his philosophy, and you can't read Plato as one of my elderly good friends used to put it, like the doctrines of Plato. I mean, you can't take out the doctrines of Plato. If you take them out, they will dissolve. So, first of all, some formal remarks. Euthydemus is structured as a comedy. It's very, very well marked. I mean, you have 5 episodes. You have short interludes between the episodes. You have a double prologue and a double epilogue. And it's the formal form of an epic comedy. 5 comic episodes, interludes, a prologue, and an epilogue. That's it. And that's going to be important later. Second, I would like to make a very obvious distinction. Some dialogues of Plato are narrated, and some dialogues of Plato are directly presented. And most dialogues of Plato are narrated, but there are some dialogues, about 2/3 and 1/3. The Meno is directly presented, like a comedy. The Republic is narrated, Socrates narrates. In the Euthydemus, we have a funny situation, which is more or less what we have in the Symposium, in which you have a narration, and inside of the narration you have direct dialogue, and that's going to be important too. Why Plato does it? Why some dialogues are narrated, some dialogues are directly presented? That's another matter. If you want, I can go into that later. I'm going to speak only about Euthydemus now, but if you want, I'm going to speak about that later. Now, dialogue is drama. Dialogue is a piece of theater, and in drama you have to take into account not only what is said, but also what happens. And if you see a piece of theater, I mean, it's important to see what's happening, and if you have only the replicas, it doesn't make sense. Second, in drama, it's very important who speaks. Of course, it's one thing if Lady Macbeth is speaking, and another thing if Falstaff is speaking, and they can say the same words. Well, not Lady Macbeth and Falstaff, but two characters in a play can say the same words and mean things absolutely different and sometimes opposed. For example, there is a difference if you ask me something and you tell me something and say, is it? Or if you ask me something and say, oh, is it? And Plato is very, very careful with the tone. I have a fantasy of letting loose one good doctor students who knows Greek to work only on answers in Plato. Yes, Socrates, no Socrates, of course Socrates, and the Greek is very, very subtle with those answers. Now, when we have a narrated dialogue, there is a narrator, and the narrator has an axe to grind. The narrator is a dramatic character, and you have to be very, very attentive why he is saying and when he is saying what he is saying and how he is telling the story. Especially when the narrator is Socrates. Socrates is a dramatic character like any other dramatic character, and Socrates wants to put forward a certain point. And in this dialogue, which is narrated by Socrates, it is especially important. So when you have because Socrates here is a dramatic character, and this idea that it's Socrates who's telling the story and therefore it must be true, that's a very rash conclusion. And in this particular dialogue, it's patently false, and Plato is very careful to mark it. Okay, that's for the framework. So let's bear in mind that this is drama, and there are speakers, and Socrates is a dramatic character like any other. Now, the dialogue is obviously about the difference between dialectic and sophistic. And we can see that in the 5 episodes, episode number 1, 3, and 5 are sophistical, and episodes 2 and 4 are dialectic. 1, 3, and 5, that's the two sophists talking to Clinias or to Euthydemus, and 2 and 4 are Socrates talking to young Clinias and then to Criton. And we have to pay attention to what's going on in this the difference between the different episodes, because Socrates says, I'm going to show you what I want you to do, Euthydemus and the episodes, and you have to see what the difference is. Now I have already we have to find the difference for ourselves, and perhaps as Criton himself says, is there a difference? I mean, he knows, he feels there is a difference. He has his heart in the right place. He likes philosophy, but he just doesn't know what the difference between philosophy and formal logic. Sorry. we'll get the form. Anyone a formal logician here? No, I like passion on the head. And the question is there a difference? And we'll have to look into that. Now, I've already said that I want to show that Euthydemus and the Episodolus are much more philosophical, respectable than we normally are prepared to conceive. We say, they are clowns, they're just doing sophisms and what. This dog is yours, this dog is your father, this dog is a father, this dog is yours, therefore this dog is your father, ha ha ha. No, it's much more serious than that. Now, the Euthydemus is a parasitical dialogue in the sense that you have to know something about Plato in order to when one of the two accounts the Euthydemus and Euthydemus, I'm sorry, they just tweeted down. But when one of them says, Socrates, I can show you that if you know one thing, then you know everything. If you know the menon, you immediately start to make, this is what Socrates says in the menon, and some other, and so on and so forth. So it's a parasitical dialogue, because it's a dialogue written for those who know Plato's doctrines and they know his method, but they can't quite tell what the difference is between what Socrates does and what the two sophists are doing. When Socrates says to young Cleinias, in the beginning he says, answer courageously whatever you think, because a great good may come to you. Good heavens, this is Socrates. And he's saying that about the sophists. So what's the difference? Okay. I'm not going to analyze the sophisms. This has been done many times, and we don't have time. We don't have time for that. What I want to stress is Plato's approach to language and to logic, which is absolutely anti-Aristotelian. I'm not saying that Plato wrote it against Aristotle. It doesn't mean I don't care. I don't think that I don't care. But Aristotle, when Aristotle writes his Sophistica Elenchi, he wants to show that that those sophisms in the Euthydemus can be analyzed in Aristotelian terms, and I'm going to show that in a minute. And I hope to show that Aristotle is closer to the sophists than Plato, and that's not news, because Aristotle normally takes it from the sophists, and Plato was absolutely opposed. Okay, the dialogue. In many, some people say most, and I read of even one that said in all, but in many of Plato's dialogues, the most important word is the first one. Kateben eiston eilein. I went down. That's the whole of Book 7. I mean, after you read the first word, you don't have to read the rest of the Republic. I mean, it's the whole thing. Or the Mino, Echeis moin legein, O Socrates, can you tell me, Socrates, whether the virtue is learned, etc.? Can you tell me? Well, of course he can't tell you. That's it. That's the first word. Now, the first word in the Euthydemus is even more important. The first word is tis. Who? Who was that one which I saw you speaking to yesterday? Because what this dialogue is going to show us is the crucial importance of the speaker. I mean, the speaker is the important element in the conversation. But then it turns out, Criton asks who was, and Socrates immediately says, no, it was not one, there were two. And that's important too, because for the sophists, as we are going to see, for the sophists, the speaker is not important. So if it's one, or two, or three, or whatever, the speakers are interchangeable. It doesn't matter who says it. So they are two, but it is as if there were only one. And if you notice, if you read the Greek, the two sophists are always referred to in the dualis. You don't have dualis in Czech.
Only very few.
Okay.
Very few.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. No, I mean, yes, I mean, they are always referred to in the dualis, not only because in Greek you can do that, but also because there's no difference between them. And I can't tell them apart. I have to make an effort to show when it is Euthydemus who is speaking or when it is that. There is a slight difference between them, like like Ivan Ivanovich Bobchinsky, Ivan Ivanovich Dobchinsky, there is a difference between them, but the difference is okay, for the sophists, and now that's important. The speaker is not important because the word is supposed to have a meaning of its own, independent of the speaker. Like a dictionary. You open the dictionary, and the dictionary tells you what the word means. Doesn't matter who says it. That's the sophistic approach. By the way, this is Aristotle. What Aristotle does in the sophisticated is that he says explicitly that all sophisms are based on language. It's either amphiboly, with the same word having two different meanings, or it's some other sort of equivocation, or it's a four-term fallacy, or they're all based on language. It doesn't matter who is speaking. The sophists, as anyone who has read about or knows, the sophists think that the words have meaning in themselves. And if the words have meaning in themselves, then we can have wonderful logic. If all A is B and if all B is C, therefore all A is C, it doesn't matter if you are saying it or if I'm saying it. And it even doesn't matter if you say the two premises and I take the conclusion. Well, yes, Aristotle didn't quite detach the conclusion from the premises, but it will be done in half a generation. It will be done. And that's why Plato is damn set against the writing of speeches, against logography. That last character that Criton says that came to him and said, well, yes, I saw Socrates speaking to those clowns. And Socrates asked Criton, is he one who writes speeches for others to deliver? Socrates, I don't care. Maybe, I don't know, and I don't care. And that's exactly the point. I mean, a logographer, a writer of speeches, writes the speech to be delivered by somebody else. And it doesn't matter who is speaking. The Greeks didn't have advocates. The advocate is a Roman invention, I think. So Socrates writes the speeches and gives it, and you. And the importance is not in who is doing it, who is reading the speech, but the important thing is the words there, and the words are supposed to do the job. So I need to make a little technical distinction. I want to distinguish between a sentence, a proposition, and an utterance. I'm sorry I don't have to check for that. A sentence is a linguistic entity. Could be an English sentence, can be a Czech sentence, can be a Hebrew sentence. That's what we have. The proposition, as we all know, is what the sentence says. So, if I say the cat is on the mat, or if I say le chat est sur le tapis, in French you don't say that, you say that only in English, it's the same proposition with two different sentences. Okay, that's a trivial distinction. But I want to distinguish between the sentence and the proposition on the one hand, and the utterance on the other. The utterance is the actual thing that's being pronounced. I mean, the utterance is inseparable from he who is uttering it. So what I'm doing now, I'm producing utterances, but you are writing down sentences that hopefully embody my propositions. But of course, but the utterance is what I'm actually saying. Now the question is, and this is, I think, Plato's question: can the proposition be legitimately separated from the utterance? I mean, is it what you are doing? Is it legitimate? I mean, you are not these machines. I mean, these little machines are taking down the utterances. But what you are writing down is those are sentences that embody propositions and not the utterance.
They are only notes.
They're only notes, yes, they're only notes, yes. Yes, of course. So, and the question is, and that's why I asked whether there are formal traditions here. The question is, can one legitimately separate the utterance from the proposition? Now, what the written page does is that the written page takes down sentences, propositions, takes down sentences that embody propositions. And Plato is dead set against the written page, because the written word separates the utterance from the proposition from the utterance. And therefore the speaker is unimportant. The speaker is unimportant. I mean, if I said the cat is on the mat, so the cat is on the mat, and that's it. And if I say if all A belongs, if all B belongs to all B, to all A, and all C belongs to all B, it doesn't matter. And that's why Isocrates or whoever appears in the first epilogue, because he is a writer of speeches, and therefore he can't tell the difference between the sophist and Socrates. And if you think that propositions can be self-standing, there is no difference between Socrates and the sophists. In an utterance, the same utterance, like as I said before, I'm just repeating that in technical terms, the same utterance for two different speakers can have different meanings. When Socrates says, if you know one thing, you know everything, he means one thing. When the sophist says, if you know one thing, you know everything, he means something completely different. He's using the same words. The proposition is perhaps the same. Plato doesn't distinguish between propositions and sentences. It's logos everywhere. But the meaning is completely different. Therefore, first episode, therefore, for the sophists, the subject of the interaction, Cleinias in this case, is a neutral receptacle. I mean, you say something and you put it in the student, and it's there. There is no need, and that's what Socrates says in 274 or 87, if you want to control me, and that's what Socrates says that's what Socrates asks. Can you start immediately educating this little boy, or do you need some protracted speech, or do you need to prepare him for something? Because for the sophists, the subject of education, of teaching, is a neutral receptacle. It doesn't need any preparation. I mean, if I have a glass of water into the glass, that's it. I mean, I pour the water and the water is there. And for the sophist, the subject is neutral, and therefore, in 275, C1, if you want to check it, whoever, Euthydemus, I think, I will not remember, he says yes on condition that he's willing to answer. Which means it's enough that he's willing to answer, and from the moment the respondent has produced an answer, his role is finished. That's it. So, who is it who learns? Those who know or those who don't know? Okay, there's an answer, and the answer is there, and that's it. And the only thing that remains for the answer is to be ashamed of his answer, because you take the answer and you work on it. So Euthydemus, if it was Euthydemus, asks, who is it who learns? Those who know or those who don't know? That's me. And Socrates says to little Clinias, answer as it seems to you. That's Socrates. That's Socrates as you get it. Now, of course, answer as it seems to you, this is also what the sophists say, but what it seems to you means something different for the sophists and for Socrates. I mean, for the sophists, it means, okay, you produce an answer, and as Dionysius says, no matter how the answer is going to be refuted. I mean, there's no escape from that. For Socrates, the most important thing is that the answer be a genuine, honest answer as you really think. And it doesn't matter if you give the wrong answer or the right answer, because Socrates is going to work on that. But the sophists are not going to work on that answer. They're going to pick down the answer and do whatever. And they're going to work with the words, and the person, who is it, is unimportant. That's formal logic for you. Yes, formal logic. The sophists are assuming something very important for logic, and from Aristotle onwards. Same word, same meaning. And I mean, if this dog is yours and this dog is a father, then he is a father and he is yours and he is your father. That's it. And if the word doesn't, and Aristotle later will say, well, if the word doesn't have the same meaning, that's amphibole, that's full-term fallacy, and we have to correct it so that the same word will have the same meaning. Footnote. In the Republic, book 10, Socrates says, we start by assuming that when it is the same word, the reference is the same reference. Well, yes, we start by assuming that, but we are going to correct it as we go along. So maybe we use the same word for things which are not quite the same, so we have to separate. The sophists are not going to do that. Same word, same meaning. Those who are those who learn, those who know, those who know, those who don't know, it means always the same. To know and to don't know is exactly the same. Not so for Socrates. Same word, depends who is using it, depends when, depends in what context. So what the sophists are doing, they are doing I would call it a proto-formalization of the argument. They are trying to develop a formal logic, which Aristotle is later going to do. I mean, the Sophisticae Elenchi, the reason he writes the Sophisticae Elenchi is to show that he can account for those sophisms in a logic of language which assumes that words have that words have meaning in themselves. Yes, they may have two meanings. Then those meanings have to be told apart. The intention of the speaker for the sophist doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what he means by his words, because the words mean in themselves. And what Aristotle is trying to do, Aristotle is trying, I would say perhaps it's time to sterilize the use of words.
So, sorry,
yes.
just a very short question.
Yes, sure.
So you see precise link between this way of the sophists to interpret this link, this relation between words and concepts, and Aristotle's way to do that. So you see.
Yes, I'm not claiming that Aristotle took it from the sophists, but there was a trend. I can't show it, but you can see it here and there. There was a trend of, as Protagoras did, use this kind of analysis of language. Protagoras starts philosophy of language, and he starts tearing apart the function, the grammatical functions. So there was a kind of investigation into language, and language in itself. Now, there were the speech writers. And the speech writers, they certainly saw language as having value in itself, and having meaning in itself. And Aristotle takes his clue from there. Plato is doing something completely different. Plato is not only doing something completely different, but Plato is opposing that trend. And that's the dialogue. I mean, why does Plato write dialogues? He writes dialogues not because it's Greek. He writes dialogues because you can't write it otherwise. Because you must show how the words take their meanings from the speaker. And you're going to...
Plato is trying to go in the same direction. He's trying to make the language more precise, more definite to me, but he doesn't believe you can go all the way. You can fully contain it.
Well, yes. I mean, in the dialogues, most of all in the Sophists, I mean, Plato has, I think you're right, and you cannot go all the way, but Plato has the idea, perhaps, of an ideal language would be a language that relates directly to the ideas. But of course we can't do it. And that's why in the Sophists and in the Politicals, you must have a respondent. I mean, because if it's an ideal language, then I can do it myself. But you must have someone who checks that you are not falling back into your natural language, that you are not... In the Politicals, for example, that's exactly what happens. I mean, he starts doing going in one way, and then it turns out that no, we are doing the wrong thing because we are not being careful not to fall back on our natural language. I think you're absolutely right that it cannot be. We can't speak a ideal language. We can't do that. Among other things, because an ideal language would have been purely formal. And we can't speak formal languages. And even my mathematician friends, they blush when they have to accept that before they start their formal manipulations, they have to say a few words in a natural language. And they blush because that's not what they want to do. And if we had a language that would relate only to the ideas, it would be purely formal. But we can't have that. So you are absolutely right. I mean, if we could have a purely formal language, it would be heaven. But we can't, and therefore, someone must check all the time whether we are not slipping back. Which happens in the Politicals. In the Sophist, Plato is generous enough to let the thing go straight ahead. Yes, I mean, as I said, all our questions are of this type. They are inescapable. Whichever way he answers is going to be refuted. When I was studying in the School of Education in the 60s. It was the heyday of programmed education. Teacher-free education. You may remember that. You won't, but my colleagues will remember that. I mean, the teacher, that's exactly it. I mean, you go to the, you have all the questions, and they show if you answer this, you go this way. If you answer this, you go this way, and then you, and it's teacher-free. And they thought that being teacher-free is much better, because then you don't have teachers saying stupid things. But you must say stupid things, because that's what dialogue is. That's what dialogue is about. Okay, so that's the sophists. Socrates, Plato, Socrates here. Words in themselves have absolutely no meaning. As he says in 295, meaning is in the soul of the speaker and of the hearer. Words, as he says in the Cratylus, words are tools, are instruments for doing something. So I use words in order to do something, in order to convey and to arouse in your souls a certain concept. I have no idea what I'm arising in your soul, but I hope something that has to do with what I'm trying to say. The man who understood that very well was Gorgias of Leontini. I mean, there's nothing, even if there were, we couldn't know it. Even if we knew it, we couldn't pass it to somebody else. But there is one thing we can do with words. We can move people with words. We can convince them to do things. Never mind what I understand by what I'm saying. I mean, if I'm a good demagogue, I can move people to do things. And Gorgias has a wonderful definition of leadership, which I found later in the Encyclopedia of Social Sciences. And that is to be a leader. To be a leader is to do things by way of others. I mean, I don't do anything. You do it. But I move you to do it. So the words are tools, and therefore the words have no meaning. I mean, a chair has no meaning. If I use it for sitting down, it's a tool for sitting down, but I can use it to prop the door open. And then it's not a tool for sitting, it's a tool for propping the door open. A word is a tool in the same sense as he says, and therefore words have no meaning in themselves. And as words have no meaning in themselves, you can't do this sort of thing. I mean, of course, if every B belongs to every A and every C belongs to every B, of course every C belongs to every A, but it doesn't mean anything. And therefore, therefore, of course, Plato's criticism of the written text, because the written text is words, and words mean nothing. Here I want to do another technical distinction. I want to distinguish between a binary model of language and a triadic model of language. Well, you'll understand. In a binary model of language, you have two elements. You have the word and you have the meaning. And the word has a meaning. The speaker is unimportant because it doesn't matter who speaks. I mean, if I say a chair is a chair, and it doesn't matter who says it. Of course, for Plato it wouldn't be the meaning, it would be the thing, the referent. No, the chair is this, not the concept, but it doesn't matter. In the triadic model of language, you have three elements. You have the speaker, you have the word, and you have the referent or the meaning. And throughout this dialogue, and also elsewhere. Plato is very careful not to say teaching means sometimes this and sometimes that. He says people use the word meaning, the word teaching in two ways. Sometimes they use it to denote this, and sometimes they use it to denote that. And if you check the references to meaning of words in this dialogue, and somewhere else, but mainly in this dialogue, it's always ternary, triadic. It's always people use the word to mean this and that. In the same way as I would say people use chairs to prop doors open. People use paper to write upon, but people use paper also to make paper airplanes. So, in a binary model, falsehood is impossible. You cannot say false things. Because if I cannot say this is a chair. If I say this is a chair, I can't say of course, if I say this is a chair, I'm not saying something wrong. I'm just not saying anything. Because a chair, but if I say a chair, I'm performing the wrong action. So I'm not doing anything. And in the same way, speaking or thinking would be like grasping or seeing. I cannot grasp it wrongly. Grasping is a binary predicate. I grasp this. So I cannot grasp wrongly. I'm failing to grasp. I can't say I'm seeing it wrongly. I just don't see it. Now, in a triadic model, I can say the wrong thing. Because if I call this, that's I and this and the word. But then I can use the word in a way in which, it's not wrong, but use the word in the way that you will not understand me if I use the word wrongly. And then you say, well, that's the wrong word. I learned the two words for entry and exit in Czech, vchod and vis. Yes, but I don't remember which is which. So I can use the wrong word because I'm using the word. But if it's only binary, if I point to the exit and I say vichod, and I'm just not saying anything because I'm failing to say something because I'm not. Okay. Now, and that's why falsehood is impossible, contradiction is impossible. I cannot say one thing and the opposite. It's like grasping and not grasping, but that's not a contradiction. That's why Socrates wants utterances. Utterances cannot be detached from the speaker ever, and therefore we must have a dialogue. We must. Plato has to write dialogues because then the utterances are not detached from the speaker, and the speaker is just not just a name. It's not just like Philalethes and what's the other one in Barclay. It's not like Simplicius in Galileo. Which is just a name. Philalethes is not even a name; just a label. Therefore, the characters in the Platonic dialogue have to be as close to real people as one can manage, because it's important that it's the speaker of a certain mental constitution, a certain biography, etc. He has characters which have no biography. But that's because the dialogue is not a real dialogue. For example, the pies in the Meno. The pies in the Meno, the little boy in the Meno, is not a real character, but then it's not a real dialogue. It's just a schema of a dialogue. Therefore, we need, therefore the episodes, the Socratic episodes, the episode 2 and 4, they start in a toteptic manner. I mean, you have to prepare the speaker to understand what Socrates wants to do. He has to take the speaker away gradually from his own positions to a more, what Socrates thinks is a more reasonable position he has. So it's important to prepare the speaker exactly what the sophists were not doing. The other thing is that Socrates always starts, and we see that in the Socratic episode, we see that very well, he always starts from where the responder, the answer is. The sophists start out of the blue. Who are those who learn? Those who know or those who don't know? Socrates starts from an existential situation. And that's why, for example, the Menon is doomed to failure from the very first word. Because there's nothing before it. You don't know why Meno asked that question. I mean, he asks it, just drops it out of the blue. And if it's if the question has no existential background, if it's not a real question out of a real situation, then there's nothing you can do with it. What Socrates does in those episodes 2 and 4 is that he works on Cleanus' soul, because the dialogue is between the souls. It has very little to do with words. The words are just so that he can communicate, but the dialogue is not in the words, the dialogue is in the soul. And it is very important in Platonic dialogues. That's what I said. I want someone to work on the answers in Platonic dialogues. It's very important in the dialogues to try and catch whether the answers are genuine or not. And Plato has ways of showing that the answers are not genuine; they're just pro forma. When Scolnicov is very clever, and he knows where things are going, and he stops answering. Okay? Or when Callicles says to Socrates, "Well, okay, I will go on, but don't take me seriously. It's just because Gorgias tells me to do it. So I'm not saying what I mean. I'm just producing answers so that the dialogue, as it were, can continue. But the dialogue can't continue. When Scolnicov stops answering, Socrates says, well, if you don't answer, I do both parts." And then he says, "That's okay." And it's not a dialogue. It's a farce. Same thing with Callicles. And Callicles says, "Are you not ashamed, Socrates?" And Socrates says, "I'm not ashamed. You are. But if you don't want, okay, so I'll go on." Yes.
So why does he continue if it's not dialogue?
Okay, if it's not dialogue, why does he continue? Okay. He continues for our benefit. He continues for our benefit, and in order to shame down Callicles and Scolnicov. Don't forget that elenchos is not only refutation. Elenchos in Homer is loss of faith. is to be ashamed by somebody else who puts you down. So I think that Socrates continues the dialogue, Plato continues the dialogue, so that we see where he can lead, and second, inside the dialogue, in order to shame Callicles down, because Callicles is not defeated by a logical contradiction. He's defeated because he just can't go on. By the way, Euthydemus and Dionysiodorus, I think in some respect, they are even more dangerous than Callicles. Because Callicles is capable of being ashamed. And Callicles at some stage says, no, I can't go on. I am a man, I am in society. The ambassador Gorgias is down there. I mean, there's things I can't say in public. Euthydemus and Dionysiodorus, they say, oh well, so I contradicted myself, and I said now the opposite of what I said 5 Stephanus pages before. And are you as old as Chronos, Socrates, that you're going to remind me of what I said last year? Euthydemus and Dionysiodorus, they don't even get ashamed. And Socrates says it explicitly. He says they said the most shameful things, and they were not ashamed of it. Because shame for Socrates is not loss of face, as it is for Callicles. Shame for Socrates is the last remnant of humanity. It's the social shame. When one is ashamed of something, it's the acceptance of the social nature of man. I mean, I'm ashamed of going naked in the street because there are other people who will see me. But in the shower, I'm not ashamed of going naked into the shower because there's no one there. Now, to be ashamed for Socrates is a recognition of the social status of man. And Euthydemus and Dionysiodorus, they're not ashamed. Callicles is. Thrasymachus, he's not expressly ashamed, but he gets angry. What? Are you as old as Chronos, Socrates? Okay, so I contradicted myself. Well, so what? But, a few minutes more. But, if one has to have a proleptic introduction, if one has to work on the soul of the people, you can't go very fast. The two sophists, Euthydemus and Dionysiodorus, they quote Protagoras and they say, we can teach virtue post tachista, in the fastest possible way. That's impossible. For Socrates, that's impossible. There are no shortcuts to virtue. I mean, you have to go the whole line, as they say in English, the whole walk. I mean, you can't just take a shortcut. The educational program in the Republic, when you have done the whole thing, and mathematics and everything else, you have to be 15 years an apprentice, and before you are 50, you are not fit for anything. Good heavens, when I was 50, I wasn't fit for anything. He was quite an optimist, Plato. Okay. But the whole thing is not 20 pages long. Now, let's look at the dialogue and see. At some stage, 290, page 290, Clinias begins to recite the main tenets of the Republic. mean, oh yes, you have to have an architectonic science, and architectonic science is not the military science, and it's not etc., etc., etc. And Creton, 290E1, he said, the lad said that. The young boy said it. The whole of, I mean, the main points of the Republic, he said it. And Socrates says, well, maybe not he said it, maybe somebody else. And Plato says, yes, somebody else indeed. Now, there are 3 points in the Republic where Plato says that story is, no, not Plato. There is one point where Socrates says, that's the point where he has to agree with Cleinias that the only good thing is knowledge. And Socrates says, well, and we reached an agreement, I don't know how. And there is another point where Socrates says to Cleinias, oh, thank you very much for agreeing with me, because otherwise we would have a very long discussion. In other words, the story is badly told. The story is not told as it was, and this is, and that's why I said it's very important to notice that it is Socrates who is telling the story, and Socrates is telling the story because he wants to make a point, and in order to squeeze this whole thing in 20 pages, he has to falsify the story. Another point, when in 290 the Creto already company, after the 2 previous things, I don't know how we reached that agreement, and thank you for sparing me the long discussion when Plato says, oh, the lad said that, I mean, that's impossible. The continuation of the dialogue is not with Cleinias. Cleinias disappears. The continuation of the dialogue is with Creton, not with Cleinias. In other words, if Cleinias lives long enough, and if he reaches the age of about 70, Creton was the same age as Socrates, and Socrates should have been 70 or 69 or what have you. If Cleinias lives long enough, and if he continues this way, and if he is as old as Creton, and if he has a sympathy for philosophy like Creton, then that's what he will say. But what Plato is doing here is that saying it can't be done with Cleinias in 20 Stephanos pages. So he's skipping, as it were, he's stretching it, and says, well, yes, this is what's going to happen in 60 years' time. No, yes, this is going to happen with Cleinias, must be about 10, right? So this is going to happen, if he goes this way 60 years, that's what's going to happen. But not now. So the story, what we have with Creton is the extrapolation of the dialogue with Cleinias. It's not, and that's why we have that break there. And then we come to there. Then we come to the final point. When the Sophists are already too much, and they are already playing around with words, the two Sophists. I don't remember which fourth Sophist exactly is the last one. Ctesippus says, Papax o Heracles, amacho to andre. What would they say? Papax o Heracles, some sort of exclamation. Oh, Heracles, the 2 men are invincible. And the response, and Dionysius immediately says, is Heracles Papax or is Papax Heracles? In other words, if you take the words in themselves, without any reference who is uttering them, not only is semantics impossible, because you don't know what the words mean, but even syntax is impossible. In any language, you can have syntactical ambiguities. Peter Leach, who was very good as a formal logician, but he was also informal logician. One of his most enjoyable books is Logic Matters. Now, is it a noun and a verb, or is it an adjective and a verb? You can't tell. Papax Heracles. Is Heracles Papax or is Papax Heracles? And without pragmatics, there is no syntax, there is no semantics. You must have pragmatics first. In other words, you must have absences, and you must put them in a context, because if you don't put it in the context, and if you don't see who is saying, when he's saying, you can't understand. Therefore, you can't formalize language. Aristotle, notwithstanding, you can't formalize language. But as we talked before, we can approximate an ideal language. We can approximate. Now, in a formal language, you don't have a distinction between true and false. There is only a distinction between valid and invalid. If B belongs to all A and C belongs to all B, then C belongs to all A. That's valid, but I don't know whether it's true or not. Because for Plato, the distinction between true and false is primarily an ethical distinction. Dionysiodorus, I think it's Dionysiodorus and not the other one. Dionysiodorus says, I can teach you anything. And Socrates says, can you teach me anything, everything? And Plato says, of course, you don't believe me, I can do that. And Socrates says, I don't believe you can teach me that good men are unjust. That's 296. Because that's an ethical conviction that he knows that's his ethical intuition that this is false. Good men cannot be unjust. And the distinction between true and false is based on an ethical intuition. I'm not going to go into why Plato develops his own metaphysics in order to sustain the Socrates' ethical intuitions. That's something else. And therefore, it's the distinction, as we know, the distinction between true and false is extra-logical. In logic, you don't mean.
This seems to me a bit unique dialogue in the sense where he talks with sophists. In the other dialogues, if you take Protagoras or Gorgias as a sophist, they are obviously wise men, at least they know a lot and so on, while Euthydemus and Dionysius, they don't show any wisdom. It's just tricks,
yes.
Nothing else.
Yes. Well, I agree with half of it. I mean, of course, Plato has great respect for Protagoras, for Gorgias, a bit less for Euthydemus, but Euthydemus is serious. He has much less respect for the second generation, Euthydemus and Euthydemus. Even Prodicus, he thinks of Prodicus. Protagoras and Protagoras, not Gorgias, because Gorgias was a rhetorician, and sometimes we call him a sophist, but it's not quite clear whether we could call him a sophist or not. Well, there was no formal definition of a sophist. Protagoras has an ethical outlook, and that's what saves him. Euthydemus and Euthydemus, on the one hand, yes, I mean, on the one hand, they don't show any wisdom. What they are doing is, on the face of it, tricks. But those tricks are based, knowingly or unknowingly, on a very definite philosophy of language. They quote Protagoras. What I'm trying to show is that, knowingly or unknowingly, they have a very definite, very well-defined view of language. I'm not claiming that they are Prodicus or Protagoras or whatever, but that, and what Plato is doing, I think, he's showing where this view of language is going to lead. It's the same thing that happens with Gorgias and Callicles. I mean, if you follow Gorgias's line, you're going to end up with Callicles. If you follow Protagoras' line, you're going to end up with Euthydemus and Dionysius. And while Protagoras was still an honest man, and he had an honorable man, I should say, while Protagoras was still an honorable man, it's nothing. It's one generation. In a few years, you're going to have Euthydemus and Dionysius. But they do have, I mean, what they are doing is serious. Not because they know what they are doing. Maybe they don't know what they are doing. But what they are doing is the development of a proto-formalization of language. And then we have the first epilogue. The first epilogue, that's when Plato says that this friend of his that comes by and Isocrates, well, I don't know, maybe. The important thing is that he writes speeches. And writing speeches is for others, writing speeches for others to deliver, is exactly taking the sentences without and separating them from who is saying them. And from here, as I said, the Greeks didn't have advocates, but it's no problem. I mean, you could have a barrister, as the English say, someone who goes in court for you, and he speaks for you, and say, you keep quiet, I'll take care of what happens. Therefore, philosophy cannot be transmitted. You can't teach philosophy. Because philosophy cannot be transmitted, philosophy cannot be taught. That's the seven letter, isn't it? After a long time of sinusia, a spark goes, either it does or it doesn't. And this is something that you cannot guarantee. I used to teach my students when I taught them Plato that I'm not going to teach you anything. And I think that's the point, that what he wants to show in the Euthydemus is that philosophy is in the meeting of the souls. He says philosophy is in the meeting of the souls. Philosophy is not in the words. And my colleagues who do formal philosophy will not be very glad that well, this is not Euthydemus. This is just a little bit of what I. And my Euthydemus book, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, maybe 10 years.
Oh, so thank you very much for the lecture, and perhaps still we have some questions.
I do have a question. You are saying they are separating language from the speaker, but they are not making the language really autonomous, something like to stand on its own, in the sense that they refuse to go back to what was said before, so it doesn't maintain connection together. It's not.
Yes. I mean, of course, we are going back to what we said before, but Socrates is not in this dialogue. In this dialogue, no. in this dialogue too. I mean, Socrates allows for people changing their minds as long as it is explicitly said. I mean, when Socrates develops his dialectic with Clinias changes his mind. I mean, yes, I meant when we said the good things, I meant something, but I now mean something else, which is fair enough. I mean, so as Socrates says, I think in the Meno, in the Phaedo, when that's about 100 and something. When Phaedo says, we said 10 minutes ago, we said something else. And Socrates says, well, it doesn't matter what we said 10 minutes ago. The question is whether we still think that this is the case, or maybe we changed our mind. Maybe are we using the words in the same sense, or are we not? Are we speaking about the same thing? There it was about. Don't remember exactly what it was, but he says, yes, but now we're speaking about, so we're using the same words to say something else. So yes, we go back to what we said, and one of the requisites of the philosopher in the Republic is to have a good memory. That's why I can't be a good philosopher. But again, you have to. It doesn't matter what it seemed to us 5 minutes ago. What matters is whether it's we're still holding on to it. The problem with the sophists is not that they are changing their mind, it's that they don't do it explicitly. And you have to be as explicit as possible.
Okay. It's just that you were saying that practically our predecessors, in a way, of Aristotle, or not Aristotle, certainly wouldn't accept this, that you can't go back and refer to something what was said before, that you can't use it in argument. So they are quite different in this respect.
Well, Aristotle, of course. I mean, for Aristotle, Aristotle must maintain, at least to some extent, that the words are. He must maintain the stability of the words. The words must be stable, at least to a certain extent. Of course, in another argument, you can use your words different, but in the same argument, the words have to be stable. Words in Plato are not stable. I mean, two different people are going to use the words in two completely different senses. Sometimes I tell my students that if two philosophers use the same word, they certainly mean two different things. You know it. And I think, now I can say it not only jokingly, that the Euthydemus is important, because the Euthydemus tries to show, one of the commentators in the 90s, one of his good commentary on the Euthydemus is called On What Is and What Is Not Philosophy. And I think that this is what Euthydemus wants to do, to show what's the difference. And the difference is not easy to grasp. Clinton is not a fool. He's quite intelligent. He's not a philosopher. He can't follow very complicated arguments, but he certainly is well disposed to philosophy, and he can't tell what the difference is. And shall I say that many commentators nowadays don't? Yes, question.
When you spoke about the necessity for the characters in Plato's dialogues to have some biography and so on,
A little, yeah.
And you mentioned this slave,
yes.
Meno. Well, I think he also has a sort of biography which is just appropriate for the
Yes.
use in the dialogue, because he must be.
Is he Greek and does he speak Greek?
Yes. And that he is also he answers without trying to cheat Socrates.
Yes.
So it's very important that
Very
once
important.
he says, I don't understand,
Very
I
important.
don't understand what you want, and so on. And then he says at the end, now I see it. Yeah.
Yes.
So
No, of course. When I say he must have a minimal biography, but it's very minimal. I mean, he has to be Greek.
Because enough.
Yeah, he has to be Greek. He has to speak Greek, because otherwise Socrates can't ask questions. And like the young children like the young boys in Plato, he doesn't have preconceptions, and he answers really as he thinks. But that's exactly it. I mean, he doesn't have a psychological background. Because, again, this is the sort of thing, and this sort of thing that can't be said, can't be done in 4 Stephanus pages, for 3 or 4 Stephanus pages. And Socrates says in that if he'll be asked the same questions many times and in different, which means, it's not. What I've done is cheating a little bit. Plato is cheating. If you take a real boy and you really want to teach him Pythagoras theorem, it's going to take more than 3 or 4 Stephanus pages. That's why I said it's a schema of a dialogue. It's not a real dialogue. We have other examples. Young Aristoteles in the Parmenides is more or less like that. He is young exactly because he comes without preconceptions, and therefore he answers really as it seems to him, and not because he wants to ingratiate himself or because he's ashamed of being defeated or for some other reason. By the way, I don't think Aristoteles in the Parmenides is Aristotle. I know that some people think differently.
One more question. When you stressed so much that in Plato the words are not fixed meanings and so, well, but I think it's necessary to be careful, because the Socrates' jokes or the Plato's jokes are based on the interplay, or how to say, between the fixed meanings and their possible changing.
Yes. In this case, I would go with you that Socrates in the Socratic dialogues, of course, he wants words to have fixed meanings, and he wants definitions, and he wants exactly what to mean, etc. I think Plato thought that fixed meanings can only be when they relate directly to the ideas, and he tries to have technical terms, but he tries very carefully to define his technical terms, to show what he means, and he's very careful because he has to use everyday words because it's a dialogue, and he has technical terms not in the Aristotelian sense. Aristotle is a master of jargonese. Aristotle speaks jargon. It doesn't make sense in English, and it doesn't make sense in Greek either. Toti and ein. I don't know how to say that in Czech, but in any other language I can think of, it's impossible. Plato has a conversational style, and sometimes you don't even notice that it's a technical term. But he tries to have terms. Although he says it doesn't matter which word we use as long as we understand what we are saying. I mean, it could be metexes, it could be parousia, by the way, there is a difference, but in this context it doesn't matter. It also, the exact, let's go this way. Words, the degree of stability of the word depends on the context in which they're being used. In some contexts, Plato is very careful. He says, well, Prodicus would have said that there is a difference and we must stick to this difference because in this context it's very important. But in some other contexts it's just not important. You have acquisitive techne and you have productive techne, and sometimes you have just techne because it doesn't really matter what's techne. Well, it's a techne and that's enough. But sometimes you want to be very, very careful whether it's acquisitive or in some contexts it's very important to see that ousia is the substantivation of ani, and in some contexts ousia is whatever, and that's what makes reading of Platonic dialogues difficult because you have to decide whether it's. But when he uses the term in a technical term, I think he makes reasonably clear that this is a technical term, especially when he has technical passages. Sometimes Plato can go for 2 pages just very, very leisurely, and then he has 10 lines, which he puts everything else. And there the terms are very, very important. And sometimes this doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Well, of course, there is a difference between metexes and mimesis and parousia. There's a very important difference. But in the field, he said, it doesn't matter whether they call it mexis or whatever, because in this context, it doesn't matter. And so I'm not saying that words in Plato are never fixed, but they have to be fixed. They have to be made fixed.
But in this respect, it would be perhaps necessary to ask you why you haven't said a word about the difference between phronesis and episteme, which is the subject matter of the dialogue.
Well, in some way it is. But I haven't said it. There are many things I haven't said. But of course, there is a difference between the episteme in the technical sense, which is in fact only knowledge of ideas. You can't have episteme or other thing. While phronesis is phronesis in the material world, and therefore phronesis is, on one hand, it's dependent on episteme. On the other hand, it's much more flexible, much more inexact, much more, and it has to do with action, with human action, with human character. And ethos is of course something which is for Plato empirical, in the sense that the different ethic of persons is not something that you can deduce from first principle. It just happens that people have different characters, and you have to take that into account. You have to take that into account in dialectic. And you can't just come with your tricks prepared and as Euthydemus supposed to do. You can't come with your tricks prepared. You have to go along with the person you're talking with. I don't know whether this answers your question,
when I read Euthydemus, I thought that most of the jokes and the traps and inquiries are based on this difference between phronesis and episteme.
Yes, because this is Aristotle. I think that's exactly the point. Aristotle says, for Aristotle, seeing that language is, I wouldn't say autonomous, but seeing that language is independent to a certain extent of the speaker. Logic is certainly independent of the speaker. And he says it explicitly in the beginning of his Sophistical Record. He says it explicitly. All sophisms and all mistakes of this kind must be understood as a misuse of language. And if you have episteme, you have a misuse language. So if you misuse language, it's because you don't have episteme. But that's okay. But that's Aristotle. I mean, for Aristotle, a sophism is a misuse of language. For Plato, you cannot misuse language. You can use language in an unhelpful way. Or you can disregard the intention of the speaker. But disregarding the intention of the speaker is not because of a lack of episteme. It's because of a misconception of the function of language. Language for Plato is a tool, and a tool can be used in any way. I mean, if I want to extract a tooth with a plier instead of one of those little things that a dentist has, I can do it. It will hurt, but I can do it. I can even extract the tooth with a hammer. I don't recommend it to anyone, but it's not that I can't. It's not a. It's a misuse. It's an unhelpful way of doing it. For Aristotle, it has to do with the way in which I understand language, not with the way in which I understand somebody else. And then I think that's the important difference. And that's why Aristotle could have lectures on physics. Plato, as far we don't know what he did on his lecture on the good stuff, but that's the only time that perhaps he had a lecture and nobody understood anything.
Yes, thank you. I found very inspiring some points of your talk, and first of all, the way in which you spoke about the idea of dialogue, of Platonic dialogue, and the idea that it's impossible to imagine a pure formal language, because when we use a word, there is always two people around this word, and a context, a word around these two people, so it's quite complicated. There was, on the other hand, an expression that hit me, an expression you used, when you say that, on the other hand, Aristotle in some way sterilized the language. I think you used sterilized the language. Yes. It was quite a strong way to conceive it. And I don't know if I totally agree in it. And to show it, I could quote, for example, the book Delta of Metaphysics, which is a very boring book, actually, when there is this sort of a series of words Aristotle analyzes. And I remember one of those, for example, which is the very famous expression arche, which is
the first one.
And in this definition, the explanation of the word, Aristotle, I think, I remember, makes a very complicated speech, saying that in arche is not a simple word, because in the concept of arche there are other words like upokeimenon, like physis. And also in these other words there is a universe of meanings, of possible way to conceive it. So I think this is not an example of sterilization, of simplification. I think in this case Aristotle looks at the word not just as a word that has just one meaning, but it's a way to conceive a word like a living one, like a living stuff, not just a tool, not just a thing. And secondly, I also think that this interpretation of Aristotle as a formalizing philosopher is based just maybe on the Aristotelian logic, but I think it's also important to think at Aristotle's physics, for example, where the idea of world, of living world, and of the context in which words and concepts are used is quite important as well. So I don't want to play the part of the Aristotelian now, but
no, please do.
I think in this case it's maybe important to show you.
Thank you very much, because it's a good opportunity to say a few things about Aristotle. But this is also a very good example of what happens when a word is said and then it's there, and it wasn't what I meant. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly it. I mean, I said by sterilize I mean something else than you understood. Not because you understood me wrongly, but because a word is a word. And
right. Good point.
Okay, yeah, big problem. Now, I didn't mean that he sterilized in the sense that he makes it simple. Mm. I use that strong word in the sense that he neutralizes the speaker. I mean, it's sterile not in the sense, the language becomes sterile not in the sense that it doesn't have different meanings, on the contrary. And not in the sense that it doesn't have a context and a conceptual semantic field and what have you. No, I meant that the speaker is sterilized. And what Aristotle is doing in that, in Book Delta, exactly in Book Delta, is that he says words have different meanings. It's the words that have different meanings. It's not that they are used this way and that way and that way. I mean, the word arte has different meanings, and we have to tell those meanings apart. And arte, at least in Aristotelian conception, is linked, and there is what I just said, the semantic field, which is out there. Aristotle himself calls that book the book of different meanings. I mean, he refers to it somehow as the book of different meanings. But the meanings are the meanings of the words, and he says, well, we have to be clear about the meaning of the words so that we don't use the words in different meanings as if it was the same thing. And that's exactly, thank you for bringing Book Delta, because Book Delta is exactly what I meant. I mean, Aristotle is trying to make the language as clear and precise as possible. And that's exactly what Plato is not doing and is opposed to doing. I mean, you can't make language precise unless you go into the direction of an ideal language. But an ideal language, as you said, can't be reached because there's always a context. There are always people speaking, and I mean, we can approximate it. We can try to eliminate or to neutralize as much as possible our human condition, but we can't. I mean, we are not pure intellects. I mean, as Plato says, yes, when we become pure, it says in the book 10 of the Republic, the soul in its real state, I mean, which is intellect alone, then maybe we'll speak formal languages. But yes, I think Book Delta is the example of Aristotle sterilizing the language, not in the sense of making it simple. No. It shows that the language is something. Yes, the language is very complicated, but the complication is in the language. Plato says no. language, it's completion not in language because words don't have meaning. And he says it is specifically in 219 thereabouts. He says words don't have meaning. And what Aristotle says is explicitly words not only have meaning, but some words have too many meanings. Okay? And if you use it not to mean what it says in Book Delta, you're just misusing it. Right? That's one of the reasons why possibly and of course we all know that the definitions of the Platonic, so-called Platonic definitions, they are not Plato's, but I can't imagine Plato writing the whole way. I can't imagine doing that. Aristotle, yes, but not Plato. Not Plato. Socrates of the Socratic dialogues, yes, but not Plato. Not Socrates of the Meno. Yes.
Don't you think that first step to formalizing language is by Plato's dialogues? I think the difference between early dialogues and late dialogues. In the early dialogues, the partners of Socrates are something like real persons. In the late dialogues are formal persons. The dialogues by late Plato is anuphones in the psyche.
Okay.
Real Socrates needs real person in the street.
Okay.
And concrete person.
Yes.
Late Plato's dialogues are completely formal. The partner said yes, no, well, and so on.
I'm not sure. Philebus, he is a real person. Prof is a real person. Euthydemus is a real person.
But in my soul, my partner in my soul,
okay.
Who is it?
Okay, yes. Now, again, Plato, I think Plato thinks that an ideal language would be like that, but we can approximate it. We can approximate to it. But I don't think that in the late dialogues, I mean, certainly not in the middle dialogues. I mean, Glaucon and Adimantus are persons. Symposium, everybody there is a person. Don't ask me about the Latina, I don't know. In the late dialogues,
dialectic in Parmenides.
Dialectic in the Parmenides.
It's completely formal like by Aristotle.
Or
not?
Ivan, you invite me next year for the Parmenides. I mean, I have...
For a course, 60 hours.
I have 300 pages of the Parmenides. No, I don't think so. But I can't say just that I don't think so. This is not an answer. I have to give at least one example. Second part of the Parmenides, first argument, incorrectly called first hypothesis. The one cannot be spoken about, cannot be thought, cannot, etc. Doesn't have a name. Can the one really be like that? Parmenides asks little Aristotle. And little Aristotle says, uk emoi ge. Ge is the most important word in the whole dialogue. It's not a word, it's a particle. mean, ukemoige. Not for me, because not at least for me, because I am speaking of the one. So I am showing that the one cannot be spoken about, and I'm speaking about the one. It may not be the same for you, because you are not speaking about the one, so you can, in your case, it's perfectly all right. And that's why we have the famous hypothesis, etc. So we have a very concrete situation. Formal, I don't know to go to that. I don't think it's formal, but it is formal in a very funny way. The negative hypotheses are formal. The other ones are not. They're all in the subjunctive and the optative, and which is important, because the subjunctive there has that's what doesn't make it formal. One of the things. Yes, in the Sophist, things go quite rapidly, because Plato wants to show something, as we just saw in Euthydemus. I mean, he has to confess this because he wants to get somewhere. Although not, as I said, I want to let loose a student on the answers, because the answers are not yes Socrates, no Socrates. They are much more nuanced than that. It must follow at any rate, and but after he finishes the Sophist, or after the Sophist comes the Politicus, and in the Politicus there are false tracks. I mean, it goes in one way, they say no, then it goes in another way, etc. The Philebus is very much a contextual dialogue. In the whole Philebus has 17 lines. And he doesn't speak. Why doesn't he speak? So it's, I don't think so. In the Timaeus, the Timaeus is not a dialogue, because it has to do with doxa, it has to do with the world. So it's not dialectic, so it doesn't have to be a dialogue. It can't be a dialogue. No, I don't. In some dialogues, there's in the Sophist, and in Parmenides, in some way, Plato is in a hurry. I mean, as it is, it's a long dialogue, and if he had to do some twists and turns, it wouldn't be finished. But no, yes, he was trying to approximate an ideal language, as we said before. An ideal language is impossible, because, as you said, we are always in the context, we're always speaking. When we are all the pure intellects, then it will be very nice, but then we won't need dialogues, then we will be thinking all the same thing, so it will be boring. I agree partly. I mean, I agree that Plato, yes, Plato was has let's put it this way, in a Kantian idea of an ideal language. Yes, in a regulative way. Yes. But that's not what happens in the dialogues 100%. I mean, it's just going there, and it's regulative. And you can't really have a formal language. As I quoted my mathematical friends, even my mathematical friends can't do it. The young lady down there doesn't have a question. No questions. Was everything that clear? Well, this disproves my thesis. I mean, if everything was clear, then the speaker is irrelevant, and that shows that I was wrong. I mean, if Plato was wrong,
Well, it would still be necessary to to say something about how is it possible that Plato was willing to give so much effort in this elaborate writing of the dialogue. It's something unbelievable.
Well, Plato.
It's necessary to combine it with your thesis.
Yes, Plato had a problem.
But
He had a problem.
Yeah.
Socrates, well, as we all know, Socrates didn't write. By the way, three of the great teachers of humanity didn't write. Socrates, Jesus, and the Buddha. Socrates didn't write. And we know that there was a fashion of Socratic logoi, and everybody was writing Socratic logoi. Whether Plato was the first or not, it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm not a philologist, so when I can't answer that question, I say I don't care. But the question is, how do you transmit those things? If you think that Plato had doctrines, as my good old friend, he must be very old now, but Ian Crombie wrote those 2 books, 2 volumes of the doctrines of Plato, the doctrines of the philosophers. Ian Crombie from Oxford, 2 volumes, the doctrines of the philosophy, good 1950, 1960 stuff. But then it's okay, then you write the doctrines of philosophers, and that's fine. Or the teachings of the Buddha. Okay, didn't write anything, but everybody was going around. Or the Gospels, Sermon on the Mount. Okay, no problem. You write it, and it's there. Plato had a problem. He was convinced by Socrates that philosophy can't be transmitted, can't be taught, and the philosophy is only the meeting of the souls. I think he found this solution in which you try to contextualize it as much as possible. You must put it in a context, and the context must be as rich as possible. And of course, those who read the dialogues, the first edition of the dialogues, they to publish them, whatever was meant by publishing in those days, we don't know. But whatever it was, of course, they knew great people of the old generation. They knew something about Rogers. They knew something about it. On the contrary, we are very much much excited by the fact that we don't know whether there was a Callicles. Oh, good heavens, there must have been a Callicles. But it doesn't matter because the dialogues stand for themselves. We can understand the characters even without knowing them, as we know Mino from some of them. So that I think that what Plato is doing is that he is giving us as much as possible the context. And for many, many, many years, when I thought I was teaching Plato, I couldn't understand why you have that soft stuff at the end of the Phaedo. I mean, it's a telenovela. And I couldn't understand why you have it at the end of the Phaedo. And a few years ago, quite a few years ago, I understood that the Phaedo makes sense, and I think the whole of Plato makes sense, only if you accept, only if you are struck by Socrates' death. And if you are not struck by Socrates' death, and if you don't understand the ethical implication, it's the same thing here. I mean, Plato was absolutely convinced, I think, of the Primat der praktischen Vernunft. I mean, Plato is about ethics. Even the Parmenides is about ethics. Next year I promised a paper on the ethics of the Parmenides. Plato is about ethics. And so he has to give you the context. He has to give you something. He has to give you the extra biological dimension. What is it? Next month I'm going to Finland and I'm going to speak exactly about that, about the extra biological dimension. That this is where the sense of the dialogue lies. I mean, the sense of the dialogue is not in the dialogues. The sense of the dialogues is in that context. And I think that this is what Plato was trying to do. He was trying to recreate the context and to give us the direct feeling of what's happening. Because otherwise it's the doctrine of Plato.
Why do you think that Plato is about ethics and not about politics?
Oh, because there is no difference between ethics and politics. Okay, no, thank you for the correction. Yes, I mean, of course, not for Plato, not until Machiavelli. We don't.
Half text of dialogue.
No. You're absolutely right. I mean, we all know that before Machiavelli, ethics and politics is yes, of course. Yes, thank you for correcting me. Yes. Ethics and slash politics, of course.
Thank you very much.
Well, so
Thank you very much.